Thank you for choosing to watch this video, in which I'll be tying a variant of one of my favourite wet flies, the Alexandra. Start by mounting your hook in the vise and testing the hook in the hold. Here I'm using a Fulling Mills Comp Heavyweight barbless hook. Once you're happy with the hook hold, catch on your tying thread. Here I'm using SemperFli's classic waxed 12-knot thread in black. A nice strong thread that is fine and doesn't build up too much bulk. Once you've got the thread caught on, trim off the waist and form a smooth underbody back to where we'll catch into the tail. Aim to end the body and tie in the tail at the end of the straight shank on the hook, a little bit beyond the point of the hook in this case. For the tail of this fly we're using some of SemperFli's SemperFlash Krystal Pearl. About 6 or 7 strands should do for this fly, but of course you can change the number of fibres to suit your own preferences. Want to cut your bunch of fibres a bit longer than needed so you've got some spare length to play with and tie in. Catch in with a pinching loop, a couple of turns to hold it in place, then check that it's sitting on top of the shank where you want it. Once you're happy with the position of the tail, you can bind it down along the shank towards the eye of the hook. Try and keep all the fibres on top of the hook to maintain the profile of the body. Keeping in mind that we want to tie in a wing and a couple of hackles at the head of this fly, we'll trim the fibres short. Catch down the waist ends. And then we'll catch in the rib of silver wire on the underside of the shank, just behind the eye, and we'll tie that down over the length of the body, back down to where we tied the tail in. You can spin your bobbin anti-clockwise a few turns to unwind the thread and help it lay flat and provide better coverage of the tail and rib as we wind back down to the back of the fly. Take your time and make sure you cover up all the thread wraps that you had already, and we've got a single end point for the body, tail and rib. Take the thread forward to where we're going to tie in the tinsel to form the rear half of the body. For this fly we're using Semperfli's Mirror Tinsel in Silver. We'll tie it in at the middle of the fly and wind effectively 2 layers of the tinsel for the rear body. Three or 4 turns of thread to catch in the tinsel, then wind it down in overlapping turns, keeping a good bit of tension to keep the body smooth. Need to be a little bit careful to make sure we cover up all the thread wraps but not extend the tinsel further into the tail or rib. Again, wind it back forward to where we tied it in touching turns, and catch in with your tying thread. You don't want to use too many turns of thread to catch it in, because we've got to tie in the front half of the body. We don't want to create an unsightly bump when we catch in the waist tag. So make sure you've got all the tail fibres covered up on the front half of the body so they don't show through the dubbing. And then we dub the front half of the body. I'm using a blend of Semperfli's SemperSeal substitute. I made its various yellows, olives and a couple of shades of blue in this mix. I'm breaking up the fibre length a little just to suit this fly, and dab on a little bit of the mix. And start winding on, making sure you keep a nice smooth profile, adding more dubbing as you need. I noticed there that it not covered up all the thread wraps at the middle of the fly, so just unwind it, go back and make sure you've got everything covered up and you're happy with the way the body's sitting. When dubbing the front half of the body, we need to keep in mind that we've still got to tie in the wing and a couple of hackles, so we want to leave enough space to do this without congesting the eye of the hook. That should do for the front half of the body on this fly. Next step is to wind the rib. We want to do this in even open turns. As you wind the wire, if you keep the angle consistent, you should get a nice even spacing. Just take your time, you can always go back and have a couple of goes at making sure we've got the spacing even. Once you're happy, catch it in at the head of the fly, couple of turns, a locking turn or two, and then helicopter off the waist rib. Now tidy up the head of the fly and create a base to tie in our wing and hackles. Making sure we pull all the fibres back as we do this to keep the head of the fly neat and tidy. Select a bunch of Peacock sword. Again, you can vary the amount you include in this bunch to suit your liking for the pattern, but I like a decent sized clump to give a nice strong profile to the fly. But what I should have done first is trim the tail to length, because that will help me guide the length of the wing. You really want the tail to be about the length of the body of the fly, so if we trim those fibres first, we can then align the wing so it comes to about the end of the tail. And so I've rolled the peacock sword feathers into a nice wee bunch, measure it up, make sure it's sitting where you want it in a nice profile, and then pinch and loop on top of the hook. Catch in with another couple of turns and check that it's sitting where you want and evenly on top of the hook. Once you're happy with it, catch it in with another turn and trim the waist ends. Taking your time, being careful not to damage the tying thread. Then take the thread to the eye and just make sure you've got the wing tied in firmly, and then we're ready to tie in the hackles. So here I'm tying in the red and black hen together so I can wind them together. This blends the feathers as we wind them and gives a nice effect. Here I've tied the black in on top of the red. This makes the black slightly more dominant in the finished hackling, so you can play with the order in which you tie them in to create different effects. Once you've caught them in, pull off the hackle tips, and then we're ready to wind the hackles. Pull them under a little bit of tension to align the stalks, and grip those stalks with the hackle pliers. You see that I picked two feathers with matching barb lengths. Now, As you wind the hackles on, try and fold the feathers back so you don't have any stray feathers, and it will give us a nice neat hackle. You can vary the amount of turns of hackle you put on to the fly to suit your liking, but 2 or 3 turns should do for most patterns. Catch in with a couple of turns of thread, then fold everything back, making sure all the feather fibres are going backwards, and form your head, tying over the end of the hackles. Do this under some tension so you make sure that everything's nice and secure. And once you've done that, and still holding the thread under tension, we can tweak off the waist hackles. If it's a bit resistant to it, I find using hackle pliers to grip the stock can help. But you do have to make sure you've got a good hold of it. There we go. So make sure we're happy that everything's neat and tidy, and then we can whip finish. This fly will just use a single 3-turn whip finish, which should be plenty strong enough. Once it's done and we're happy that it's tight enough, we can trim off the thread. Make sure we're happy with everything sitting. A little brush with Velcro will mix the hackle fibres and pull out some of the dubbing body. That's the tying finished. All we need to do is varnish or finish the head of the fly. Here I'm using Solarez Bone Dry Clear UV resin. I like this as it gives you a really nice, clean, shiny finish and head in the fly that doesn't take any time to set, so you don't have to leave it drying. Just take your time, make sure you don't get any resin on the hackles. And making sure you cover all of the head of the fly without clogging the eye of the hook. Once you're happy, a quick zap with the UV lamp to set the resin, and you can see the red hackle pops quite nicely in the UV light, as do some of the fibres in the front half of the body. And that's the fly finished. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, please like it and subscribe to my channel to be kept up to date on any new videos I post.